The House will come to order. Members, today let us bow our heads for a few moments in silent reflection in your own traditions. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the member participating remotely.
Rarick.
Okay, they're ready for you.
Rarick.
Rarick, present.
Rarick, present.
The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. Members, today in the chamber we have with us Mayor of Blaine, former Representative Tim Sanders, who served in this body from 2008 until 2016. Please welcome with me former Representative Tim Sanders. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 94th Session, 2026, St. Paul, Minnesota, Monday, February 23rd, 2026.
If there is no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The chief clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House Files 3669 through 3748.
First reading, House Files 3669 through 3748. Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we will take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail. There's a motion at the desk. The clerk will report the motion.
Nash moves that Senate File number 856 be recalled from the Committee on State Government, Finance, and Policy and be re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law.
I recognize the member from Carver, Representative Nash, to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, that is my motion to recall and refer. This Senate File 856 has been in the possession of state government and has had 2 hearing dates. And yesterday, we as Republicans put forth our best faith efforts. We accepted some amendments. We talked about the need to get this moving. We talked about how it's an important issue to the state of Minnesota, how Minnesotans who are the true victims of fraud need to have the voice of the OIG brought online. And what we're seeing is a delay. One delay after another as we admire the problem, as we talk about how important it is, but we hold it in committee. And we talk about, oh, we've got plenty of time, but I would like to point out to the body, and Madam Speaker, it's a little loud if you could.
Members, please take your conversations to the alcoves or the retiring room. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're admiring the problem and we say, oh, there's plenty of time. We have time on our side, almost like a Rolling Stones song. We don't have time on our side. We have roughly 8 hearing dates left in aggregate here before we leave. That's not a lot of time. And for those of you that are first termers, that sounds like an eternity, but it's gone in the blink of an eye, and this bill needs to get moving. So what I would recommend, members, is that we put up a positive vote to re-refer this to the judiciary where we agree that it should go. We will allow some of the amendments that we did not put on yesterday. We encourage them to be put on in judiciary to have a full-throated conversation around things that are germane to their jurisdiction in that committee. But here's the reality. You don't have time. Things move much faster than you realize. And a delay can only tell Minnesotans one thing, as we saw with the meeting minutes from the governor's OIG council, that the governor would like to see something different than 856. So again, as I said yesterday, one can only surmise that maybe that is the cause of this delay, that we're not actually interested in moving things out. And I would point out that you and I and the senators are the ones who make and move legislation. The governor can affix his signature to pass into law or veto it, but he is not part of the legislative process until we deliver him a bill that has come out of conference committee, or the Senate agrees with ours or we agree with theirs. That's how this works. So let's not continue to admire the problem. Let's not slow things down. Let's not prevaricate the issue. Let's get this going. You have a chance right now to do the right thing. And Madam Speaker, I would request a roll call on my motion.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Further discussion. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Cleavorn.
Thank you very much. And, you know, I just find the floor to be a fascinating place. This is really the work of committee. It's not the work of re-referral. When we had our discussion on Thursday, when I first chaired the committee, we asked for the DE to be adopted. The DE was not adopted, but then there was outcry, as though I had done something heinous by calling the vote for the DE to be adopted. Well, we discuss things after we adopt them. We don't discuss them always before we adopt them. And so once the DE was voted down, there was nothing to adopt. When an amendment is voted down, it no longer exists. So that's what happened on Thursday. I was very happy that Co-Chair Nash brought the bill back up on Tuesday when he had the gavel, because it gave us an example, or an opportunity, I should say it that way. It gave us an opportunity to go step by step by step of the things that some of the House members on our side of the aisle would like to see. Things like constitutionality. Separations of power must be respected, as my co-chair just stated. We are the legislature, the governor is the governor. So we do have separation of power, and in order for a bill to be effective, we have to respect and honor the Constitution. So that's one piece. 2 amendments of 9 were accepted. One of them did nothing more than change the dates for a bill that you wanted an urgency to pass, that every date in it was no longer appropriate. So, okay, great. We can agree that we have dates that need to be moved out. That's awesome. And as we went through the 9 amendments, 2 were adopted. The priorities of this side of the aisle for this to be a majority bill in the House were not adopted. And those things include things like preventative measures, ensuring that the OIG is not above the law and a rogue agency all by itself. Every entity of the state must be governed by the laws of the state. So there are things that really need to be fixed in this bill, and the appropriate place to fix those is state government. Constitutionality. If we are going to pass a bill out of state government, it needs to have the right separation of powers, and it needs to be constitutional. And this chair will not pass an unconstitutional bill out of committee. That's just not going to happen. So members, I'm glad there is a roll call vote. We have all sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution, and your no vote on this bill, to this motion, is a vote for upholding the Constitution of our state. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Washington, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. There are minor things in the Senate bill that both Senate and House authors and people working on it think could be changed to make it better. Minor things. We are meeting, again, our working group is starting to meet on Tuesday. And we're going to sit down. We're already sending the stuff to each other. And I think a lot of this is going to be non-controversial. But it's got to be done in the working group, folks. It can't be done by one rogue party bringing in DE amendments that got the bill or bringing in individual things. Even if they're decent, it's got to be done in the working group. And everyone, I think, we recognize that. Judiciary was the next stop for this, and it should go to judiciary because there is a potential language issue that Representative Cleavorn talked about. There's also some data things that I know, at least in the Senate and potentially in the House, very minor things want to change, and they're going to start working on that before it gets to judiciary. But what we saw last year with House File 1, which went through many, many committees, and we were amending it with the Senate languages, the language that the House and Senate had agreed to as we were negotiating. And then it got stuck in State Gov. So House File 1 died in State Gov because it was held by the chair, co-chair. This bill now is being stuck in State, well, there's two chairs. This bill now is being stuck in State Gov because it's being held by one of the chairs. It's stuck in a committee, and it needs to be at other committees too. The bill should go to judiciary now, and frankly, it could come back to State Gov after they've done their things and they've looked at it. But I think they have the right to do it, and by holding this bill up at a time when we have limited time to get things done, what you're essentially doing is killing it. And that's just the wrong thing to do. You're also making it so that other committees aren't able to take a look at it themselves, and they should. They should have that ability to do that while the working group works on these little minor amendments. So I ask us to move it there. If you want it back in State Gov after, fine. So thank you.
I recognize a member from Clay, Representative Joy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We were in committee last week on this bill when it came out. And, you know, when you look at this bill, if you follow the history of it, 60-7. In the Senate, it passed 60-7. Bipartisan work. The 7 members that did not pass this bill in the Senate were Democrats. 7 members. That's who they should be working with. They should be talking to those 7 members of their side of why they don't like this bill to move it forward. That's the most bipartisan we've seen. And now the Democrats bring this bill last week and silence us on discussion. And Representative Norris brings a 25-page delete everything amendment to a bill that passed in the Senate 60-7. When we do legislation here, we see it move along all the time with amendments being added in different committee stops to the floor. So to me, to hold this up in committee, to play party politics on this, when your members in that other chamber pass this. This is unbelievable and how serious the Democrats are about fraud. Obviously, there's other influence from outside, like our governor, that's pushing for changes to this bill. He doesn't want this. Here we are on week 2, brought it up, and it got stopped. Here we are. They're not serious about this, but just keep in mind, I want everybody listening to understand 60-7 and the 7 were the Democrats that did not like this bill, but it passed bipartisan. Let's get this done.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Minnesotans are sick of the fraud. They are sick and tired of the fraud. They're sick and tired of the fraud in state spending. They're sick and tired of the fraud in state government. People claiming to be for a bill while they're trying to slow roll and gut it. And they're sick of the fraud about claiming to be concerned about the Constitution. We saw bill after bill after bill passed in the last trifecta that have already been struck down as unconstitutional. Folks on this side of the aisle said, that's unconstitutional, that's going to get struck down. I, in fact, gave many times a variation of the speech we just heard from across the aisle. We all swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, and we saw 70 votes on the other side of the aisle time after time after time to violate the Constitution. We saw bills in committees this week that are unconstitutional being pushed by the folks on that side of the aisle. So don't think you're fooling anybody when you claim you're worried about passing bills that uphold the Constitution. Minnesotans see through it. But for those of you who don't, Here's what the folks on the other side of the aisle are talking about when they're talking about the constitutionality of this thing. They want Governor Tim Walz, the biggest failure in overseeing fraud, to have unilateral power to choose who the Inspector General is under this bill. That's what they claim is unconstitutional. That's not gonna fly. The way this bill is set up is perfectly constitutional, putting the Inspector General within the executive branch, but putting some parameters around how that's going to go. And if Governor Walz wants to challenge that, to give himself more power to choose a lackey to be the Inspector General, I welcome him bringing that lawsuit. I don't think it's going to win, but we should pass this bill. Let him make that argument. If he thinks he can make that argument, let him make that argument. This bill, the way it is, yes, there are some tweaks that we should do and move it along in the process, but it is constitutional. Don't listen to the fraud coming from the other side of the aisle. Don't listen to the claim to be for a bill while they're trying to gut it, while they're trying to slow roll it. The people of Minnesota are going to see through that. Let's keep this bill moving along, get it to the Judiciary Committee where they can work out the data practices things, get it back to the state government, get this thing moving so that this new important agency can get stood up as quickly as possible. Don't gut it. Don't slow roll it. The people of Minnesota can see through your fraud. Please vote yes.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Koznick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Leader Niska, I didn't mean to speak after you at the direction of the chair, but Madam Speaker, would Chair Cleavorn yield for a question?
Representative Cleavorn will yield for a question. Representative Koznick.
Thank you. And members, I'm on the State Government Finance Committee. I was at the last committee hearing and the one before that, the first opportunity, the Democrats gutted the bill and the independence of the legislature in there. Yesterday, Democrats held up the bill and are slow rolling it under the guise that it's unconstitutional. Chair Cleavorn, what part of the bill, can you cite a line in the bill that you deem has constitutional issues?
Representative Cleavorn.
Thank you, Representative Koznick, because I didn't know this motion was coming before me. I do not have my computer or the bill in front of me, so I cannot cite the line for you, but I will tell you that it was the A1 amendment that was offered yesterday. So if you have that A1 amendment from yesterday before you, you will know the line. Furthermore, I would like for you not to, on your side of the aisle, I would like for you not to call us lackeys for anyone. That is derogative, and we don't really have that type of decorum on the floor of this body. Furthermore, Representative Koznick, if you would have read the DE and the Senate file that you are supporting right now, you would see that the majority of the bill is exactly the same. We have things that we definitely want to change. There are things like preventing fraud that need to be included. There are things that you are calling tweaks, like getting rid of the duplication of services and opportunities in there. And to the idea that a tweak in law, what does that mean? So a tweak in law could be something as simple as changing an article, a, an, and the. Simple words, but totally change the meaning of an activity. And you, on the other side of the aisle, 7th graders learn the separation of powers. We all know the importance of separation of powers. That is not a small tweak. That is a big deal. Constitutionality is a big deal. I can't tell you how many times I have heard from that side of the aisle that I should uphold the Constitution. Well, I'm doing just that. That's my job, it's my oath, it's my responsibility. No matter how many times somebody wants to call me names or tweet about me, I will do my job, and I have a backbone. So don't think you're going to bully me into accepting something I don't want.
Representative Koznick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And that was an eloquent way of saying I really don't know what's so unconstitutional in that bill. The A1 amendment that was put into before the committee yesterday dealt with the legislature, the House and the Senate having our own legislative authority to say who an independent inspector general is. that will inspect and enforce the programs and inspect for fraud within the executive branch's programs. Would Representative Norris yield for a question?
Representative Norris will yield for a question. Representative Koznick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Norris, you are the author of the DE and taking this bill in the Senate. Can you share with the body what Supreme Court ruling you may be citing that the A1 amendment or any part of the bill is unconstitutional?
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Norris.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, Representative Koznick. I don't have the Supreme Court case at the tip of my finger. What I will say is that it's very frustrating that we're having this conversation because I don't believe that there's any debate about this. I have now talked to the Senate author. I have now talked to the lead GOP senator. I have now talked to Representative Anderson. I have talked to the legislative auditor. I have talked to House nonpartisan staff who have all advised that this needs to be fixed in order for the bill to be constitutional.
Representative Koznick.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. Again, members, another eloquent word salad saying, I don't know why it's unconstitutional, really. I can't cite a Supreme Court ruling. I can't cite a line in the bill, but we're going to just be frauds about it being unconstitutional. Members, Minnesotans are watching, and the mental gymnastics that we're hearing from the other side of why we can't address a very broadly supported bill to add an inspector general to fight the fraud and the corruption in the state of Minnesota government, the mental gymnastics it takes to vote against this motion, the mental gymnastics it took to not advance the bill so that the legislature can continue to work on that, that mental gymnastics coming from the frauds on fraud is amazing. It's absurd. Minnesotans should know who's holding up combating fraud and rooting it out in our state government. It's not the Republicans. It's the Democrats that are being frauds on fraud.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Cleavorn.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your granting me the opportunity to speak again. And Representative Koznick, we have awesome staff here. So I was able to get the line of the bill. So if you would please look at page 5, line 4, you will find the information that you were seeking.
I recognize the member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I believe I already did request a roll call, so that's on the way. Well, if you're a reader of the classics, you've probably read Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. And I would change the title briefly here that this is a tale of two realities. The tale of two realities here today before us is that our side of the aisle is saying, move this along the way, and Chair Cleavorn, I'll just give you a slight correction. You said that we're voting on the bill here today. We're not. We're actually moving the bill on to the next committee where they can have discussion about the bill that needs to possibly make changes, and we're going to release the hostage that is 856 from our committee. So it's not a vote for the bill today. You can actually feel safe and snugly that you can actually move the bill along the way, because once again, that backward clock is ticking against us. One of the things that I love is the measurement and study of time, the Latin term tempus fugit. Members, tempus fugit. This is moving rapidly. The Earth is spinning around its axis faster than you realize, and the longer you sit and admire the problem, the longer you try to just bump this off, you become a little bit like a character in A Tale of Two Cities, Madame Defarge, who created a list of things to get rid of, mostly people, but you're trying to get rid of this issue, you're trying to get rid of this bill, you're trying to admire it in perpetuity so that the people of the state of Minnesota can say, well, gosh, they tried, they talked about it. maybe that's enough. Talking about it is not enough. Fraud requires action. So will you provide action? Will you stand up and be counted? It takes one of you to stand up and say, you know what? Let's move this to the next committee and let those committee members do their work. This has had 2 hearings just in the last week of elapsed time in state government. Do you need to hold on and hug this tightly? Or move it on to the next committee and let those members have their effort to improve the bill? As I said yesterday in committee, when, oh, by the way, we talked about the DE, under my gavel, we talked about it. Under your gavel, we just decided any author's amendment, any DE amendment just has to go straight to a vote, no conversation, no questions, particularly when it was page after page after page after page of brand new stuff. But yes, we should totally just put it onto the bill because that's what we do. Well, that is not what we do. And under my gavel yesterday, we made sure that we allowed every member, your side, my side, to ask questions. What a concept, asking questions. So my question to you today is, are you going to stand up and be counted? Are you going to do the right thing? Are you going to say simply, you know what, let's move this to the next committee. We'll let those chairs and those members do the work that we did because we engrossed some amendments. Let's get this moving. Release the hostage. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the member participating remotely.
Rarig.
They're ready for you.
Rarick, aye.
Rarig votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and 66 nays, the motion does not prevail. There's a motion at the desk. The clerk will report the motion.
Long moves that House File Number 3477 be recalled from the Committee on Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law and be re-referred to the Committee on State Government, Finance, and Policy.
I recognize the maker of the motion, the member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we heard from members on the other side of the aisle, time is short and we need to do work in committee. And so I am proposing that we move a bill that was heard yesterday in Judiciary, which is my bill, to create a civil right of action for constitutional rights violations against Minnesotans, and move that to Committee on State Government, Finance, and Policy. This was not my idea. This was a motion that Co-Chair Scott made in committee yesterday, that this was an additional stop that the bill needed to have before it could be considered for the floor. We had one amendment that was taken in the Judiciary Committee that Republicans offered and we agreed to. But the request was that there is more work to do in the State Government and Finance Committee, and given that we are short on time and that we have work to do on these bills, I'm making that motion. This is an important bill to ensure that Minnesotans who have seen their constitutional rights violated, which we have seen an incredible increase of in the last several months, including violations of the First Amendment for individuals who were peacefully protesting and were injured or assaulted by federal agents, violations of the Fourth Amendment for individuals who had warrantless searches, including doors being broken in without judicial warrants and homes being invaded, violations of the Fifth Amendment, including violations of due process up to and including the tragic death and killing of 2 Minnesotans without due process. So this is an important bill and an important right for Minnesotans to be able to have the opportunity to redeem their constitutional rights, to seek civil remedies for the harm that's been caused to them by federal agents and others in this state. And I ask that we move it to state government so that we can continue this conversation.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I encourage a lively conversation on this re-referral. I'm recommending a no vote at this point because we made that motion and the Democrats didn't want to do it yesterday. The Democrats voted that they did not want to send it to state gov, and so because they didn't think that it was going to have any effect on state and local governments and the cost that it might have to those local units of government. I would just urge people to vote no at this point. There was a bite at the apple yesterday, and it was not taken.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, I'd like to ask for a roll call on this motion.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And first of all, what Chair Scott said is just not accurate. We ended up changing the motion to send it to state and local government. It was Co-Chair Scott's request that we do that. Yeah, we did not believe it needed to go there because the portion of the bill that pertains to that is actually already in law, as I understood it. But we did say, by Co-Chair Scott's request, yes, we will do that because we thought that would be something that would perhaps get some buy-in from the Republicans, since that was her request. So indeed, we did make that motion. Indeed, the Democrats, all Democrats on the committee supported that. This is a very important issue, members. Unlike the thing that we were just talking about, we're not even trying to bring this right to the floor, although probably this bill is ready to come to the floor. We're just asking to move it to another committee so that it can keep moving. And this is indeed a very important issue to Minnesotans. We heard in our committee yesterday, if you have rights, but there is no remedy for your rights, it's like not having any rights. So right now in Minnesota, a so-called law enforcement officer who happens to work for the federal government can break down your door without a warrant, without any of the kinds of exigent circumstances or other exceptions to the warrant requirement that exist. They can come and break down your door and pull you out of your house, maybe in your underwear in the freezing cold, which they did to somebody who wasn't even the right person that they were looking for, and they can do that to you and you have no remedy. Too bad, Minnesotans. That's what the Republicans are saying. Fix your own damn door. No, this is wrong. This is wrong. It doesn't matter who is breaking down your door. It doesn't matter who the president is who's sending the goon squad to your door. You need a remedy. Minnesotans need a remedy. Right now, you cannot get a remedy when they drag you out of your car for no reason, or when you are exercising your constitutional rights to observe them, and they come and attack you and squirt tear gas and pepper spray at you. When they roll a smoke bomb under your car when you're an innocent family driving through a neighborhood and almost kill your baby, you have no remedy. This is entirely wrong, and this is what the bill does. It gives a remedy to Minnesotans. This is the bill that you are voting for if you vote yes, to give Minnesotans a remedy. And all we're asking for is to move it to the next committee. So if you have to vote no on this, what the heck are you afraid of? You don't want Minnesotans to have a remedy. All they're going to do is go to court. You don't want them to be able to go to court and possibly get compensation for harms that were done. If you want to vote no on this re-referral motion, shame on you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would expect this to be a very green board because I have heard many comments over the years from my Republican colleagues that they want to uphold the constitutional rights of Minnesotans. And that is all this bill is seeking to do, to make sure that Minnesotans have their constitutional rights upheld and strengthened, and an ability to go to court when those rights are abused. And as my colleagues have said, those abuses have been front and center over the last few weeks. And one of the things that we're trying to do this session, members, is to just tell you what we've seen with our own eyes in our communities, and just plead with you not to look away, to sit with what has happened to Minnesotans and ask yourself, is that right or wrong? Should I and do I have a role to ensure Minnesotans have their constitutional rights upheld? And so I want to share a few of those stories. Hopefully you've seen some of these because they've been all over the world, but you have to really try hard not to have seen what has happened, but I think perhaps that has occurred for some. There's been video evidence of ICE agents repeatedly asking for the papers of Minnesotans just because of the color of their skin. On one specific example, an American citizen, why are you asking me? And the ICE agent said, because of your accent. In the United States of America, because of your accent. There's other more serious instances, of course. We've talked about Renee and Alex, but there have been so many more violent assaults on people. In one instance, somebody's skull was broken, and what ICE said about it, they said the person, on their own volition, ran into a wall. That's what they said. The person broke their skull running into a wall. Now, that individual right now does not have a recourse in the state of Minnesota to challenge ICE agents who are blatantly lying about what happened to him. And by the way, what every medical professional in that instance said occurred. And so these are many items. Another thing that happened, a Somali parent-to-be was driving to her prenatal appointment. She was tracked and followed by multiple ICE agents, surrounded her vehicle, and harassed her. Now that mother now feels frightened to go to her doctor's appointments because of what occurred to her. Again, blatant racial profiling and a direct assault on her constitutional rights. And I need to say what I've seen with my own eyes in my community of Richfield, an incident that, again, you'd have to be willfully trying to not hear about this. But in my community, 2 workers, while they were on the job at Target, 2 young men, 2 young workers, were violently assaulted by ICE agents. Greg Bavino himself blatantly asked, even though there were multiple folks around, Greg Bavino singled out our 2 workers that were people of color and asked them, are you citizens? And pulled out his facial identification software to try to ID those folks. The workers were backing away. They were violently assaulted and detained, U.S. citizens, young people, while they were working at Target. Both required medical attention at the hospital. One was detained for a good chunk of the day while his parents were fearful, had no idea where this person was. And again, my constituents, those United States citizens, do not have a recourse in the state of Minnesota if federal agents break their constitutional rights, which absolutely happened. This is the easiest vote I've ever seen in this body, to vote to move this bill forward so that we can do what we should always be doing, which is making it a priority to make sure that Minnesotans, our constituents, constitutional rights are protected. So please vote green.
I recognize a member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let's all take a big, deep breath. All right, so let me start off just to set the tone. You got my vote, Leader Long. This goes to State Gov. I think you're going to see a lot of other votes for that as well. Now, I want to provide a little bit of behind-the-scenes context for how things went down in Judiciary yesterday. I think there's a difference, a sincere, legitimate difference in perspective between the co-chairs on this. As a member, rank and file down the table, I personally was confused about what was going on because my understanding was we were all no votes on this thing, on this bill. And so when the conversation started to happen, and it started to happen somewhat organically between the co-chairs about whether or not there was a fiscal cost to this, and if there was a fiscal cost, that would justify it being heard in State Gov. And then from my perception, Co-Chair Liebling said, well, okay, fair enough. We'll change the motion. Instead of it's going to wherever it was going to go next, it'll go to State Gov. And Peggy seemed to think that that was an okay concept, but then amongst ourselves, we're thinking, well, we don't like this bill. And I'll tell you why in a second, as briefly and concisely as I can. But I think that's really what this is all about. This is about a organic conversation that happened between co-chairs on tape, on camera, confusion amongst the members as to what the implications or intentions of that conversation were, and things went down the way they did. That said, what's the harm in having another conversation in another committee? We can do that. Here's why I don't think you're going to like the way that conversation goes, though. We continue to hear about how there's no remedy. There is a remedy. It's a preemptive remedy. It's a preventative remedy. You see, the branches and levels of government interlock. Our system only functions if all of the gears are doing their job and linking appropriately. Operation Metro Surge never would have happened if state and local law enforcement was working cooperatively with federal law enforcement. Again today, as we've heard for the past week and a half, we keep hearing federal law enforcement described as so-called law enforcement, pretend law enforcement, acting as law enforcement. They are law enforcement. And in this context of, we've been sitting here, this is supposed to be a paper push, right? We're sitting here talking about constitutionality. Constitutionality over there, constitutionality over here. Constitutionally, the federal government has the enumerated power to set and enforce immigration law. And if you're going to make the conscientious decision to not participate in that process, to take your state and local gears out of the machine, then yeah, things are going to go a little haywire. And we could talk about whether the methodologies utilized by the feds are appropriate. I'm open to that conversation. In fact, there's one of your members who pulled me over, not literally, but on the side of a committee room hearing last night. I won't tell you who it was because I don't want to taint their reputation as being willing to talk to me. But they're sharing these stories with me, the same type of stories you're sharing right now. And you know what came out of that conversation? I'm like, fine, let's set up a meeting. Let's set up a meeting with people in your district, with your law enforcement. I want to hear straight from the horse's mouth. And this isn't the first time I've tried to make this type of thing happen behind the scenes. Because I do think there's something that our side is missing here. Because our districts are having a different experience than your districts are having. That's clear. And when people with very different perspectives have very different experiences, it becomes almost impossible to create some sort of Venn diagram of common understanding. So to that end, by all means, let's have another conversation about it in State Gov.
I recognize a member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Wow, that's a very interesting conversation we're having today. But I'll start off by asking you some questions. You ever struck by things that really smell bad? I mean, like outrageously horrible smells. I've jotted a list of them. Sewage. When I was the mayor in Waconia, I took a tour of one of the lift stations. Not something I would recommend that you do because the smell is wildly offensive to the nose. Rotting food. We've all seen those things that live at the back of our refrigerator that we're not sure how they got there. Might be meat, might be cake, could be something else. A live well, for those of you that fish, a live well, Representative Lilly, a live well that you forgot to rinse out when you're done fishing at the end of the day. You go to open it up the next time, you're like, whoa, that's awful. That smells pretty bad. Skunk, obviously. A personal favorite of mine, having raised several teenagers, a teenager's sport bag that didn't get opened up to the air to let things release. But you know what smells really one of the worst things that you'll smell here at the Capitol? Is hypocrisy. DFL hypocrisy in particular. You've got a motion to move something on to the next committee right after you said, no, we don't want to move anything on to the next committee stop because that's bad. That's really, really bad. Let's not do that. We're going to hold it tight. We're going to hug it and admire the problem. And we're going to stand up and we're going to stomp our little foot and say, we're not going to move it on. But then minutes later, you say, we'd really like to move this on to the next committee because it's vital. It's important. And that smells pretty bad over here in the dog pound. It's almost like something else that comes from a dog that you might smell. Do you realize how hypocritical what you're doing is right now? I am astounded by this, that you would have the temerity to say no to simply moving the OIG bill on to the next committee stop to be talked about there, but now you're going to tell us how vital it is to move this one to state government. So as the co-chair of state government, you know what? I'm going to join Representative Hudson, and I hope a lot of us do, and say, sure, send it over, and then sit there and enjoy the stench of your own hypocrisy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize a member from Scott, Representative Tabke.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to talk and have this conversation today. What our community has been going through in Shakopee with regard to ICE and federal agents in our community has been reckless, it has been lawless, it has been unfounded, it has been unprecedented, and it's been overwhelming. Having ICE in our community, some days hundreds and hundreds of agents in, we're 45,000 people in Shakopee, and it has been decimating businesses. We just had another business that told me yesterday they're going to close. Construction sites are completely shut down. But what we're talking about today with House File 3477 is critical, and I'm really glad that it sounds like GOP is going to support continuing to move this bill forward so it can have this work done. And I just want to tell a couple stories. We have mobile home park in Shakopee that has one way in and one way out. It's on the west side of town, and it's a large mobile home park, and just has a ton of incredible people that live there. And ICE has a tendency to set up checkpoints that if you have dark skin, you get stopped coming in and out of this mobile home park. And one of the first interactions we had with ICE in our community was this time it was a U.S. citizen who was stopped, and he had no idea what was going on. It was masked agents, didn't know if it was Shakopee police, didn't know what was happening, because we hadn't had any interactions with ICE at this point in our community. And he had stopped, didn't know what was happening. ICE broke the windows in his car. They dragged him out, tossed him on the ground, and I went and visited afterward. They let him go. But since this is an organization that is working with complete and total immunity from the leadership at the federal government and the lack of checks and balances that are existing today in handling how ICE is working, what is happening to this family is they've got a vehicle that they cannot fix. It is immobile now, and he got tossed to the ground. I went and visited after, and there was glass everywhere and blood everywhere because they had tossed him into the ground, into the glass from his car that they had just broken. U.S. citizen. And I would like everyone to ask themselves if this is the things that should be happening in the United States of America just because you don't have skin that's the same color as mine. It's unconscionable, and it is just an awful, awful thing that is happening. We have another family lives right behind the hospital in Shakopee, whose father had overstayed his visa, and ICE did not have a warrant, and they knocked down the door. And instead of letting the door be knocked down in their house because they were doing what they thought was right, the father left, and his two kids followed him outside, 8 and 12, to try and protect their dad. And ICE took these kids and held them at gunpoint in their garage. An 8-year-old and a 12-year-old held them at gunpoint. And there's video of this, and it is just awful to know what families in my community, communities all throughout the metro, all throughout the state are going through right now because of this organization that we cannot hold to any sort of accountability. And that's what this bill will do, is allow people to have some sort of accountability and transparency as to what's happening. And so I appreciate that everyone is going to support this today and continuing to move forward, because this is what Minnesotans need now in light of this terrible, terrible force that has invaded our community and created a theater of war in Minnesota, where our neighborhoods are and where we live. So I appreciate folks voting in favor of re-referring House File 3477. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Madam Chair, thank you. Madam Speaker, thank you. Operation Metro Surge was not perfect. We are not a perfect people. Only God is perfect. And mistakes were made, and those mistakes were identified by our administration. Some of those mistakes were shared by residents in our districts, including my district in Wright County. And I met with several good friends that had concerns similar to those that were mentioned on the other side. No one in our country that is a legal citizen should be required to carry papers and prove whom they are. And I reject that. Mistakes were made, as I said. We are not perfect. But please don't get lost on the things, the good things that Operation Metro Surge has done. And if you don't think this is good, then what is good and what is evil is lost on you. They recovered over 3,300 missing immigrant children in the state of Minnesota that were taken over the border by coyotes, taken away from their parents, their mothers and fathers. This is the facts. 3,300 missing children. They captured, ICE were able to rescue them and hopefully reunite them with their parents. So too is the fact that they did capture violent, heinous criminals. Those are the facts. Again, I will reiterate, mistakes were made. We're not perfect. But they were able to capture, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, this is good news, violent criminals who were raping, who were sex trafficking our children, who were murdering, who were stealing. Due to time, I won't read the names, but I have a list of over 50 names of immigrants who are here illegally, who ICE captured, and their rap record would make you wince. Killing, raping, murdering, sex trafficking, pedophilia of our residents in Minnesota. And yet not one of you over there can mention or at least acknowledge the fact that it was a good thing that hundreds who perpetrated their crimes on Minnesotans were captured and taken out of our state. is all you can do is pontificate and communicate the negative and the things that happened that were mistakes. And yes, mistakes were made. Tom Homan recognized that. He was brought into this, our state, by President Trump to acknowledge it, to fix it, and to ensure that it doesn't happen again. But if we, at least as legislators here in the House, can't recognize that some of the worst who were here illegally, over the 25 million that were let into our country over the last 4 years, who are in our state doing those heinous things, I think you're missing the opportunity to at least acknowledge and be thankful that those criminals are no longer in our state, in our communities. And I think deep down in your hearts, you're glad that they're not in your neighborhoods creating this kind of crime. Madam Speaker, if we had time, I certainly would read the names and the crimes in which these people were executed and caught and now will be prosecuted and pay for their sinful behavior and crimes in our state. But perhaps we'll have another opportunity if my friends on that side of the aisle continue to call our federal agents, Representative Liebling, not law enforcement, thugs and all other names that you call them, and won't even acknowledge that they've taken some of the worst out of the state of Minnesota. At another time, Madam Speaker, I will read the names of those criminals who are raping, murdering, sex trafficking, selling drugs, killing, harming, and pedophilia in our state. Thank you, President Trump, and to our troops who did the right thing and got these criminals out of our districts and made our people safer. And let's pray for them. Let's pray for our persecutors. And let's pray that mistakes cannot be made, and that if they are, they will be corrected. And we can continue on with those agents who are still in our state, identifying the fraud in our state. Madam Speaker, thank you.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Feist.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to cite to some data that we have on the people who are being detained by ICE right now. We hear a lot about the worst of the worst, about how the people who are being detained are primarily criminals. That is not true. Fewer than half, this is data from The Guardian, fewer than half of the people in the data, 40%, had any criminal charge against them, and only 23% had a conviction. Of those who did have a criminal conviction, nearly half were for nonviolent and immigration offenses. Traffic offenses alone made up nearly 30% of the convictions, the largest category by far. Some 9% had criminal convictions for assault, but only 1% were for sexual assault, and just 0.5% were for homicide. There's also really good data from the Cato Institute looking at immigration and crime, and they found that in cities where they had a large influx, in particular of undocumented immigrants, that they saw a decrease in the percentage of murders, and that was true even for localities that were sanctuary jurisdictions. So, we've heard some stories today from my colleagues, and I think all of us, including, I think on both sides of the aisle, know people who have been impacted by Operation Metro Surge who are not criminals. And I just think it's really important to state that. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. House File 3477 is actually a really important, it kicks off a really important discussion, but it's not the discussion that we've heard on the floor at all today. The discussion we've heard on the floor today is about whether we as the state of Minnesota have the power to regulate the federal government. And it's actually kind of interesting that we're hearing this kind of a strategy again from Democrats, like we've heard the last couple of years, of trying to pretend like we want to talk about policy or federal policy instead of talking about the state issues that we actually have the authority and responsibility over here at the Minnesota State Capitol. Just as we all learned about separation of powers in 7th grade, I think we all learned about the fact that there's a federal government and a state government, and there's a supremacy clause in the U.S. Constitution. So we as the state of Minnesota don't actually get to regulate the federal government. That's not within our power to do. But what is in our power to do is to regulate the state government, to regulate local governments. And House File 3477 is actually worthy of discussion as to whether or not we should have an analog to Section 1983, which they have at the federal level. Congress could pass this, something that would give a remedy to people against federal agents. They would have the power to do that. If we were members of Congress, that would be a discussion we could have. But what House File 3477 actually would do, that Minnesota actually would have the power to do, is create a whole new liability, a whole new cause of action against every state agency, against every county, against every local government, against every law enforcement officer at the local level. That's why it is important that this bill does get sent to state government. It's probably why it needs to get sent to government operations. It's probably why it needs to get sent to public safety, probably some other committees as well. Because what the actual effect of this bill is, if you actually read it, House File 3477, just look at Subdivision 1. Subdivision 2 was taken out in committee. But Subdivision 1 says, any person who under color of any statute, ordinance, regulation, custom, or usage of the United States or of any state or territory, including, so that means every city policy, every county policy, every city ordinance, if that violates the state or federal constitution, we've now created a new cause of action in Minnesota state law. And I'm kind of surprised that the Democrats, again, are bringing forward this legislation because of the experience I had in my first term, where Democrats created millions and millions of dollars in state liability because of unconstitutional laws that were passed, that were challenged under 1983. I'm kind of surprised that Democrats want to open up the state analog to that. But I think it's worthy of discussion. I think it's worthy of discussion in the State Government Committee. I think it's worthy of discussion in the Government Operations Committee to understand its effect on local governments. I think it's worth discussing in the Public Safety Committee to understand how this changes the liability of our state and local law enforcement officers as they go out and do their work in committee. So I'm going to vote yes on this to move it along to the next committee. I think it's important that it continue to have those discussions. I think it probably does have to come back to the judiciary to figure out whether or not we do have the authority. I don't think we do, to regulate federal agents in the state of Minnesota. So Representative Long, I've always kind of wondered why we don't have a state analog to 1983. I think half the states do. Minnesota is one of half the states that don't. So I think it's an interesting conversation, but it's a very, very far-reaching conversation. It has a lot of far-reaching implications, none of which are the implications we've heard about in this lengthy floor debate. So I'll be voting yes to move it along, to continue to do that committee work, but this needs a lot of work and a lot of examination before we'd ever agree to pass it into law. So thank you, members. I'm voting yes.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for a good conversation today. Thank you to my colleagues that will support moving this along. Let's do it. Let's pass this. Let's move it on to the State Gov Committee. I encourage a green vote.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, the maker of the motion, Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. I am very glad we are moving this on. That was our attempt yesterday at the request of Co-Chair Scott. We made her motion, and then all Republicans voted no on her motion. So I'm very glad that we will be voting yes to move it to State Government Finance. I'm also glad that we finally heard an acknowledgement that, quote, mistakes were made. Sometimes those are also called constitutional rights violations, and that's what this bill is trying to fix. It's trying to give a remedy to individuals in Minnesota who've had their constitutional rights violated. Rights like being arrested and detained as U.S. citizens without due process, rights like having Minnesotans be assaulted for exercising their First Amendment right, rights like going door to door asking residents to identify their neighbors of color, rights like demanding that Minnesotans produce papers for the crime of being a person of color in Minnesota. Or in my district, the deployment of chemical munitions in the middle of a crowded intersection in the middle of the day when families are shopping. Or most tragically, the shooting and killing of Alex Preddy and Renee Good. We heard a little bit of speculation blaming the victim that the reason Operation Metro Surge happened was because of actions in Minnesota, but I think if you follow the timeline, the reason this happened is that members on the other side of the aisle invented the noted fraudster Nick Shirley to the state and then bragged about it, and that caught the attention of our fickle president, whose poll numbers are flagging and wants to change the subject from the economy that is going down the tubes to targeting members of our community in the state of Minnesota.
Madam Speaker.
So
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What is the order of business that we're on at this time, Madam Speaker?
We are on the final speech to recall and re-refer House File 3477. Representative Long, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Constitution is the highest law of the land. There's no supremacy clause issue here. Minnesotans deserve protection for constitutional rights violations. I hope we can all agree to that. I'm glad we will be moving this on. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the member participating remotely.
Rarig.
Okay, they're ready for you.
Rarick, yes.
Rarig votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 109 ayes and 18 nays, the House File 3477 motion to recall and re-refer to the Committee on State Government has passed. Announcements. Representative Niska. Representative Scraba.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, there's a bunch of folks from all over Minnesota talking about the boundary waters, preserving it, making it nice. I want everyone to understand I represent the boundary waters. It is a very precious place. There is no mining inside the boundary waters. If there are people saying there is mining in the boundary waters, it is a lie. Disregard it. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Elections Committee will meet in 10 minutes at G23.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hussein.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just want to let my colleagues know that we sent out invitation for iftar dinner on Monday. If you haven't signed, please sign so we can do a head count. Thank you.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And for committees that are meeting now, you do have 30 minutes after caucus as well to meet today if the time is needed. So Madam Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3:30 p.m. Thursday, February 26, 2026.
Representative Niska moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3:30 p.m. Thursday, February 26, 2026. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails. Representative Niska.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Niska moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails and the House stands adjourned until 3:30 p.m. Thursday, February 26, 2026.